So what I wanted to share with you today was the project that we did quite some time ago, 4 years ago, in the National Gallery of Art. It's bigger. So it was an exhibition titled Silent Collections, Privately Owned Lithuanian and Estonian Art from the Second Half of the 20th Century. It was the idea of this exhibition was sort of a reaction to the processes that were taking place at the time. Several private, at least in Lithuania and possibly in Latvia, not sure about Estonia. But the private contemporary new private collections were becoming more and more vocal, much more active in the public sphere, and art collecting was being presented and being perceived as something new and hip, and it was a big hope in the art field. Of course, with the current problems from 2020, probably art collecting is not as important anymore. It's good to remember the good old times in that sense. What we aimed was to look at the prehistory of these processes and to look at the time, the Soviet years, when the reasoning behind collecting art was not as straightforward as an investment opportunity or wide name recognition or money laundering. With my colleague Jolanta Marcišauskytė-Jurašienė, who is with us here, there, next to Lolita, we were responsible for the Lithuanian part. But we wanted to invite our Latvian and Estonian colleagues to join us in the search for the remaining private collections and to see what are the similarities, what are the differences, what are the links. So Latvian researcher Pēteris Bankovskis, he was working on his book dedicated to the history of art collecting in Latvia at the moment. And he was really eager to join the exhibition with the Latvian works and Latvian stories. However, during the research period, when he went to the children, to the heirs of the collectors who had already passed, he understood that there are no material. There are like 20 works altogether that could be brought to Vilnius to the exhibition. And in his eyes, it was not the best works. So the glory of the former collections could not be told in an exhibition. So we only, unfortunately, had a wonderful lecture by Pēteris the day after the exhibition opening, where he told the heartbreaking stories of how the collections were either taken away from the collectors in the late 80s or stolen or sold out in early 90s. But the Estonian researchers Kadri Asmer and Raivo Kalomies joined us with the Estonian stories. There were 9 Lithuanian collectors presented and 5 Estonian. And we were basically looking all the collections started between 1960 and 1990. That was our goal, to look at this period. And you can see that the professions repeat themselves between the collectors, doctors, financists, actors, and businessmen. So the main thing when we were looking at the field and at the collections was that the person would not be professionally affiliated with the art field, was not professionally an artist or art historian or museum worker, and that he would put significant time and money into collecting modern and contemporary artwork, because of course there were collections built on antiques, 19th century art, pre-war art, but we were the most interested in the people that wanted to be part of the current modern contemporary art fields, helping artists and interacting with them. What was the most interesting for us in the exhibition was to convey the different aims that the collectors had or the roles they took upon themselves in the art community. It might have been an expression or a result of deep friendship with particular artists, or it might have been patronage. They might have seen themselves as agents, or they just wanted to create personal haven and escape from the grim Soviet reality in their home. For example, Mart Erik's collection, as the Estonians, I suppose, know well, is famous for the works by the artists of Palace School, and of course for the love of Raiul Rajangu, the self-taught starter of the postmodernist painting, as people call him. And the friendship started in 1985 when the collector and the artist met, and Erik bought first works from Rajangu, while Rajangu wanted to put those works on fire to heat his home. And since then, Erik became patron and an agent of the artist till today. Martin Milus is, of course, a person, remarkable person known all over the Baltics, and I suppose in elsewhere in the post-socialist, post-Soviet region. And his collection was built on a lot of traveling, a lot of partying, which helped him build a huge network of friends, artist friends, whom he very bravely asked for artworks as presents. When asking the Lithuanian artists what do they remember about Martin Milus' visits to their studios, they said that the final winning card that he would put on a table when asking for an artwork would be saying that he has Ilya Kabakov's artworks in his collection, and it's a limited time opportunity for your work to be in the collection next and hang on a wall next to Ilya Kabakov, and people would have a hard time to say no to Martin Milus and to this argument. Jonas Žiburkus combined an interesting case in that sense that he combined his love to the artwork of his generation, 70s and 80s, and his interest in Jewish history and Jewish artists. Also, he combined, you could see him as a classic good art aficionado who aimed at creating an extremely aesthetic experience in his homes and in offices. And on the other hand, he saw himself as an agent, helping artists to sell works abroad and continuously representing particular artists in Lithuania, similar to what Mart Erik is working with Raiul Rajangu. And Stasia Michelytė is the only woman collector we managed to represent in the exhibition. And she was a doctor to many artists who usually said thank you with their works. But she also saw purchasing the artworks as a way of supporting those that were less beloved by the Soviet system. And there are famous stories about how she had friends, designers and artists who continuously had to help her to rearrange her apartment in the way that as much of the collection would be possible on the walls for visitors, which would be coming to her apartment on many and often occasions. And the last one I wanted to mention was Vladas Žukas, which also you could say that his collection is ethically based. Most of the Lithuanian collections or the older generation collectors' collections were ethically based, meaning that the artists they interacted with wanted to help by purchasing their artworks, shared the same view of occupied Lithuania and strive for democracy and for independence. But what is particularly interesting about Vlado Žuka's collection was that he put a lot of effort and money into trying to bring the Lithuanian émigré artists' works back to Lithuania, of course illegally. He would listen closely to all the people going abroad to the United States, to Paris or London or to Australia, and begging them to meet with the artist and bring the artworks in their luggages. And then, of course, have huge unveiling parties at his home when one or a couple of artworks would come in from abroad and the community would come and see that. So during the meetings we had for preparing for this panel, and Inga was asking us about the possible directions for the future research, I was thinking about the questions I would constantly, repeatedly get while giving tours in the exhibition. And one would always be about the artists' collections, and another would be about the museum collection. And the artists' collections, as I see them, when you look at them as a whole, are amazing artifacts illustrating networks of close friendships and collaborations, and they tell stories of the international or at least Baltic networks of artists. And they are, at least in Lithuania, some of them are still almost intact. Meanwhile, institutional collection, which would seem to must have been organized according to a particular set of criteria and rules. With Jolanta, we looked a little bit about how did our museum collection acquire artworks, what were the criteria in choosing one artist or the another. But we, of course, stumbled with incoherent system that would take a lot of time to understand, because it really tells stories about unexpected influences, lobbying groups, courtesy, personal obligations, and all other unsanctioned reasons. So somebody knew somebody owned somebody, there was a happy accident that the censors didn't forbid to buy some more avant-garde works into museum or some other lucky stories. And thinking about these kind of networks, how the artist collections were built and how the museum collections are also kind of result of an interesting networking process, I came back to a interesting and quite influential Lithuanian monograph that was published already 10, 11 years ago. It's unfortunately only published in Lithuanian, entitled Searching for the Origins of Sąjūdis, the Power of Contentious Networking, edited by Ainė Ramonaitė and Jūratė Kavaliauskaitė. A group of sociologists and historians gathered a substantial amount of interviews of people that were part of ethnographical, ecological, intellectual, artistic networks. And the researchers aimed to show that these networks that were established established themselves in the 60s, 70s, 80s were extremely important to help organize a large part of the society to be politically involved in the late 80s and stand up for democracy and independence. So in the light of the overwhelming and yet so inspiring grassroots protests in Belarus in 2020 and the amazing civic resistance in Ukraine at the moment, this importance of contentious, disobedient, and creative networking seems to me once again of crucial importance. The collectors that we talked about in the exhibition played an important role in the art world by providing a greatly needed moral and financial support for the artists whose artworks were not shown in official exhibitions and who were not being bought to the institutional collections. Buying these works, of course, helped the collectors themselves show their stance against the system or build the social capital, if you will. But they were just a part of a wider spread artistic networks or art world networks, which I think would be important to look at in order to understand the reasons behind great artworks and the fact that they were preserved in the private or institutional collections, and we are lucky enough to see and research them. And not diving into the topic very deeply yet, just thinking the top of my head, I came up with a few of Lithuanian examples of what networks I would think about, as Vladas Vildžiūnas and Marija Ladikaitė, whose home was a safe haven for the lack of a better word, non-conformist ideas. And in the Thinking Pictures exhibition, you can see a few photos representing of what kind of happenings and events would take place in their home or in their yard. Meanwhile, as recent Elona Lubytės research showed, Vildžiūnas' artworks were frequently acquired and commissioned by the State Museum of Art, but it didn't kind of ruin his reputation in the eyes of non-conformist artists community. The other example would be Judita Šerienė, who worked in the State Museum of Art and who, together with her husband Vytautas Šerys, an artist sculptor, hosted the most well-known avant-garde art salon. So they would show the artworks in their salon that were censored in the exhibition hall of the museum that Judita would see during her work hours. But also Judita, at least that's her side of the story, that she would try to persuade the decision makers to acquire some of the less controversial works to the museum collection, while preserving the more controversial in their own collection, which is more or less intact. And also reacting to the presentations by Toms and Gregor, of course, very important part of helping artists and helping artists to earn very good fees would be architects who would commission monumental artworks, and also publishers who would commission illustrations to the formalists, artists who would get no, official commissions from the state institutions. So looking at this, not only on the national but also the Baltic level, would work both as a comparativistic study, in my eyes, showcasing the particularities of the network systems, but also would allow seeing the Baltic support networks, how they worked in the countries and, of course, amongst in the region as itself, and the networks, the international networks. Thank you.